If you have been through a relationship with a covert narcissist, you already know that leaving is not the end of it. You thought it would be. You thought that once the relationship was over, once the distance was there, you would start to feel better, that the fog would lift, that you would return to yourself. But instead, something else happened. You felt worse. Not in every way. Not all at once. But there was a kind of collapse that came after, a disorientation that felt nothing like what you expected recovery to look like. You questioned things you had never questioned before. You found yourself defending someone who had hurt you, even inside your own mind. You felt grief for a relationship that had been making you disappear. And underneath all of that, a question that would not leave you alone. Why is this so hard? The answer is not that you are weak. The answer is that narcissistic abuse does not just damage the relationship. It damages the internal structures you use to process reality, your trust in your own perceptions, your sense of what is normal, your understanding of your own needs. Recovering from that is not the same as recovering from an ordinary loss. It is a different kind of work, and it follows a different kind of path. That is what this video is about, the 5 stages of recovery from narcissistic abuse, not as a neat progression, but as the honest terrain of what this process actually looks like. The first stage of recovery does not feel like recovery. It feels like the opposite of it. This is the period immediately after the relationship ends, or after you first begin to see it clearly, even if you are still in it. Everything you thought you understood about the dynamic begins to shift. The story you had been living starts to have a different shape. This stage is characterized by a particular kind of mental exhaustion. You are not just processing the end of a relationship. You are simultaneously trying to revise every memory you have of it, reinterpreting moments, conversations, patterns, in the light of what you are now beginning to understand. What makes this stage especially difficult is that the grief is not straightforward. You are not grieving a person who was simply wrong for you. You are grieving the version of them you believed in, a version that may have been constructed specifically to be believed in. You are grieving the relationship you thought you were in, which may have been significantly different from the relationship that was actually occurring. That kind of grief is disorienting in a very specific way, because you cannot simply mourn and move forward. You have to first grieve, and then revise, and then grieve again for the revised version. Give yourself time in this stage. The instinct to rush through it, to get to the part where you feel better, will not serve you here. The unraveling has to happen before anything else can be rebuilt. The second stage is where clarity begins to form. Not completely, not all at once, but in pieces. This is the stage where you start to find language for what happened, where you encounter words like gaslighting, covert manipulation, narcissistic injury, and feel, perhaps for the first time, that someone is describing your experience rather than asking you to question it. This recognition can be extraordinarily powerful, because one of the defining features of narcissistic abuse is the way it dismantles your confidence in your own perception. You were trained, slowly, consistently, to doubt what you saw, to accept their version of events over your own, to treat your emotional responses as evidence of your instability rather than as accurate signals about what was happening. Finding language for those experiences does something important. It separates what actually happened from the interpretation that was imposed on it. It allows you to say, this was real. This occurred. My reading of it was not wrong. This stage also typically involves a significant amount of research, reading, watching, seeking out other people's experiences, and finding your own reflected in them. That process is not obsession. It is the mind doing what it needs to do, gathering evidence that confirms your experience was real, because it was trained for so long to dismiss that evidence. One caution for this stage: clarity about what happened is not the same as closure. Understanding the dynamic is the beginning of recovery, not its conclusion. At some point in this process, often when you least expect it, anger arrives. For many people who have been in narcissistic relationships, anger is unfamiliar territory. The dynamic typically required you to keep it managed, suppressed, or redirected. Expressing it produced consequences: withdrawal, escalation, the accusation that you were the one who was unstable. So you learn not to express it. And eventually, in many cases, you learn not to feel it. When the relationship ends and its constraints begin to lift, the anger that has been held in place starts to move. And it can feel enormous, surfacing at unexpected times, in unexpected intensities. This is not a sign that something is wrong with you. This is the stored emotional response of someone who was not permitted to have it in real time. The anger contains crucial information about what you needed that you did not receive, about what you tolerated that you should not have been asked to tolerate, about the distance between who you were treated as and who you actually are. Do not rush through this stage in the attempt to reach something calmer. The anger, processed honestly, is part of what eventually becomes the boundary. It is part of what eventually becomes the refusal to accept less than you deserve. Let it be what it is. The fourth stage is where the longer work begins. Because narcissistic abuse does not just wound you in relation to one specific person. It wounds the internal architecture you use to move through all of your relationships. Your trust in your own judgment. Your sense of what you are worth. Your understanding of what love is supposed to feel like, and what it is not supposed to feel like. Recovering that architecture requires something that may be unfamiliar if you spent a long period of time in a relationship where your needs were consistently treated as secondary. It requires attention to yourself, not the anxious, hypervigilant attention of someone constantly monitoring the emotional temperature of the room, but the quieter, more deliberate act of noticing what you actually need, what makes you feel safer, what restores you, what depletes you. For many people in this stage, the first genuine act of recovery is learning to trust a feeling again. Not to immediately question it, not to override it with logic or with loyalty to someone else's account of reality, just to notice it and treat it as information. This is also the stage where patterns begin to become visible. Not just the pattern of the relationship you have left, but the patterns you carry into relationships generally. The ways that earlier experiences, often long before the narcissistic relationship, prepared you to accept certain dynamics as familiar. That is not blame. That is understanding. And understanding is the beginning of choice. The fifth stage is the one that is most difficult to describe because it does not look like a dramatic turning point. It does not announce itself. Integration is the stage where the experience of what happened stops being the central fact of your life and begins to take its place as one of the things that shaped you. This does not mean forgetting. It does not mean forgiving in the sense of releasing the person from the truth of what they did. It does not mean pretending that the harm was not real. What it means is this: you are no longer defined by it. The experience is yours. It happened. It changed you in ways that were costly, and in some ways that have made you more perceptive, more boundaried, more clear about what you will and will not accept. You carry that knowledge, but you carry it as part of you, not as the thing that governs you. People in this stage often describe a very specific shift. They stop waiting for the person to acknowledge what they did. They stop needing the vindication from the narcissist, from mutual contacts, from anyone who witnessed the dynamic that they now understand will almost certainly never come. That release is not resignation. It is the recognition that your recovery does not depend on their acknowledgement, that your sense of what happened is complete without their confirmation, that you are, finally, the authority on your own experience. That is integration. Before you go, something important about the shape of this process. It is almost never the clean linear sequence these 5 stages imply. You will move between stages. You will think you have passed through anger and find it returning. You will feel a moment of integration and then be pulled back into confusion by a memory, a message, an encounter. You will have days that feel like regression. You're not doing it wrong. Recovery from narcissistic abuse is not a straight line. It is a path with turns, with places where you loop back before you can move forward. What matters is not the speed. What matters is that the center of gravity is slowly shifting, that the confusion is gradually becoming less total, that you are building, piece by piece, a relationship with yourself that no one else controls. In the next video, we are going to look at something that often accompanies this process without being named: CPTSD. Complex post-traumatic stress disorder, and what it actually means when your body is still responding to a threat that is no longer there. If you have noticed that your nervous system does not seem to have caught up with the fact that the relationship is over, that video will explain why. Make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss it. And if this video describes something you have been living, please share it. Someone in your life may be in the middle of this path right now and have no language for it yet. You might be giving them that language. Take care of yourself, and I will see you in the next one.